Hello guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is Jason Bibilan aka Organizon 118 and welcome to this episode of Understanding Environmental Science. Okay, so last week or last 2 weeks ago, I discussed about ecological footprints and also the some major causes of environmental problems or the five major causes of environmental problems. And for this week, I will be discussing to you about science, matter, energy, and systems. Okay, so what basically is science and what do scientists do? Okay, scientists actually collect data and develop hypotheses, theories, and laws about how nature works. And how did they able to do that is that they are actually using some processes or what we call the scientific process or the scientific methods. But before we are going to discuss about scientific processes and scientific methods, let's first know about what is science. Okay, science is a broad field of study focused on discovering how nature works and using that knowledge to describe what is likely to happen in nature. Some of the definitions, like in science books, basically states that science is actually a is a systematized body of knowledge, okay, based on facts and because of how they observe things and how nature actually works, okay. So it's a broad field which actually focuses on discovering how nature works, and because of this, we actually the scientists make an observation, okay, of how this how does nature behaves, okay. And after that is that they collect the data of what they have observed, and then they develop some hypotheses and create theories and laws then to understand how the nature works, okay. It is actually based on the assumption that events in the physical world follow orderly cause and effect patterns that can be understood through careful observation, measurements, experimentation. And this is what we call the scientific processes, okay. So in a scientific process, we or a method, okay, it's a process of understanding how nature works by careful observation, measurements, and experimentation. So there is a process in order to understand how the nature works, okay, and there is actually a method, okay. And since it is a method, so we have to follow it in an order or in a manner where what would be the start, uh, what would be the first step, the second step, the third step, and the fourth step in as in dealing with or in a processing scientific methods. Okay, so like for example, okay, scientific process helps us to find out how clearing forested land, like for example, if we have a vast forest here in Negros, okay, and we deforested that area, okay, we clear the forest land. So we want to know if how deforestation can affect its ability, can affect the ability of that area to store water and retain soil nutrients, okay. So we need to understand, we do some scientific process. If we have a deforested land area and we need to find out if what would be the effect of deforestation into the if into the water supply, or if the water will be retained at that area, or there will be a loss of water if that area is deforested, and also as well as the soil nutrients, if the soil nutrients will also be decreased or will retain or will be decreased on its quantity, okay. So in order to find out, okay, what would be the effect of a deforested land, then we do some scientific processes or method. Okay, so how do we do that? We identify a problem. So what would be that problem? Okay, it's like for example, if the problem is the land has been deforested, okay, then find out what is known about that problem. Okay, so if there is a literature search, okay, and then you research some literature that was published in the internet or on website, then you found out that there's already a known problem about this kind. There's already a known research about this kind of problem, then ask a question to be investigated. So if there are, like for example, recommendations that of the author that has not yet been discovered or has not yet been known, okay, then you ask a question, or you can also ask a question of that kind of problem of what you are actually interested of. Okay, that has not been known by any literature. Okay, then after that is you collect data, make an observation, you collect data, you gather it, then you perform an experiment. Okay, then you analyze data, then after that, and so on and so forth. So just by using of the flow of this diagram, this actually is the complete set of doing scientific methods. But I will be talking about to you some the general, okay, the general scientific processes. Okay, actually we have five methods or scientific process here. Okay, so number one is you make an observation. So by making an observation, you're actually gathering data, okay, or knowledge or information. Like for example, is what we have portrayed earlier about the deforested land or clearing of a forested land. Okay, so what would be its effect on the what would be its effect on the storage of water in that area, and also the soil nutrients, if the soil nutrients would be retained or it will be depleted, okay, on that kind of area. So you make an observation of what happens to the water there. You gather data what is actually happening to the water supply there or the water resource there, and also you gather as samples in order for you to test that, and you also you in gathering information or data, it could be qualitative, like you just, okay, so there are two types of observation here. Okay, it could be a qualitative, that means you are using your five senses. So in that area there, like in the deforested land, okay, what happens to the soil, what happens to the water, okay, just by using your five senses. Okay, then you take down notes what you have been observed on that area. Is the water supply decreases, okay, or there something that is happening on the soil or even on the surrounding plants or surrounding living organisms, what is actually happening there. Okay, that means if there are no more, like in the deforested area, there are no more there's decreasing in the biodiversity. Okay, if there are not anymore many animals that are already inhabited that area. Okay, so you make an observation of what is happening by making out your by using your five senses. Okay, that is what we meant by qualitative observation, or you can do quantitative observation. That means you measure its quantity. Okay, you measure the most useful observation, and it is in quantitative observation that is actually the most useful observation, because it allows us trends to be seen. Okay, so it allows trends to be seen. That's why quantitative is the most useful observation. Like for example, if you quantify the amount of water already in that area after it has been deforested, from time to time, is it decreasing or increasing? Okay, you quantify how much water has been retained or how much water has been stored in that area after it has been deforested. Okay, and you will see that from time to time, what would be the trend? Is it decreasing or increasing? And you also get a sample of the soil, and you you analyze for its nutrient content. Okay, like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, which are the primary components of the fertilizer, the NPK value. Okay, so you get a sample of the soil, you analyze it for nitrogen content, phosphorus content, and potassium content. If is it decreasing or increasing? Okay, so that is why quantitative observation is a very useful observation, because it allows us that there is a trend to be seen at that particular observation. Okay, so that's it. And we gathered this information, and this information or pieces of information are what we call the data. Okay, and these data are very important because it allows us to answer our problem or our questions. Okay, so another one is that when the same observation has been made by many investigators in many situations with no clear exceptions, then that is what we call the natural law. Okay? So like for example, if you gather data about the deforested land, you gather data, the water has been lost, there is a decrease in nutrients, and if there are many investigators in other country, like that is also their problem. If there are deforested land areas there and they make experiment if what is happening to the water resource or the soil nutrients there, and if you have the same data that have been collected with that particular problems, then it could come up that your observation could be a natural law, that other experimenters would have the same observation as yours if in that kind of situation. Okay, and there are no exceptions on your observations that you have made. Okay, so other experimenters will do that kind of method just like what you have been doing, and they will also find the same observation of what you have, then that will become a natural law. Okay, so then after you make an observation, you propose or formulate hypothesis, okay? Or you propose a scientific hypothesis. So scientific hypothesis is actually a possible or a testable explanation of the data. Some would say that hypothesis is what we call an educated guess or a tentative explanation of what has been observed. So it is a tentative. It's not yet been proved because it's still tentative. Okay, that is what we call the hypothesis. So it's a possible, and your hypothesis should be testable. So a valid hypothesis need to be correct and must be testable. So you can never correct your hypothesis if it is not testable. Okay, so your hypothesis should be testable so that you can prove that your hypothesis is a valid hypothesis and it has been approved by the next step of the scientific method. Okay, so it must be testable, and it could be a possible. Okay, it could be a tentative explanation of what you have been observed. Okay, so like for example, when a forest is cleared of its vegetation and exposed to rain and melting snow, it retains less water and loses large quantities of soil nutrients. So this would now be your hypothesis that when an area is deforested and there are no trees anymore, okay, during the rainy season, okay, or melting of snow, it actually retains less water because the water now will be drained downside. Okay, it will drain down to the where it will be drained. Okay, and there will be no water or less water would be retained at that surface, and also the soil nutrient would also be lost, okay, on that area. Okay, so that would be your hypothesis now. uh, Less water will be retained and large soil nutrients would also be lost. Okay, that is your hypothesis. Okay, if a forest has been cleared or if a land is deforested or a forest has been deforested, less water has been retained and large quantity of soil nutrients have been lost. And after that is that because your hypothesis is testable, then you test the hypothesis by experimentation. Okay? But before that, if hypothesis is inconsistent with the results of the experiment, then you can actually revise your hypothesis or discard your hypothesis. That's why it should be testable. So that whatever would be the results of the experiment, you can correct your hypothesis or you can discard the hypothesis. Okay? So therefore, after you test the hypothesis, after you make an hypothesis, you test the hypothesis because your hypothesis is testable by doing an experiment. Okay. So, experiment is actually a clear set of procedural steps that test the hypothesis. So, in experiment, there are also steps that you need to consider in order to find out the result of the experiment. Okay. And this is the method that is actually used in order for test your hypothesis. If your hypothesis is correct or it needs to be revised or discarded. Okay? So, the hypothesis can be altered, but the results of the experiment cannot. Yes, of course, because your experiment is absolute. Okay? If you are actually um, if you are doing the experiment, okay, in how it is done correctly, okay, then the results would not be altered because that is already absolute, because that is the result of your experiment. Your hypothesis can be altered, it can be revised, but not the result of the experiment. And in experiment, there are actually variables. Okay. Number one is we have dependent variable. Okay. Dependent variable is the responding variable because it responds to the change in independent variable. And you have number two is you have independent variable, like variable that the experimenter can manipulate. Like for example, for dependent variable. Okay. Like for example, the dependent variable would be the amount of water retained, okay, on that area. Okay, the amount of water retained on that area. And your independent variable would says that if that you get a like for example you get a sample like 1 meter of this 1 meter of the depth of the soil, 2 meters of the depth of the soil, 3 meters of the depth of the soil. So you get that kind of sample, or in the specific area of where you are going to get that soil, okay? Or you get that soil and you test for the nutrients and the retention of water. Okay, so that is independent because you are actually you fix you fix your variable. Okay, so where it will be look of where will your sampling be. Okay, you fix it already on that kind of amount or that kind of quantity. Okay, you fix it. But for dependent variable, like you get the amount of the retention of water, you get the amount of water there at this site. Okay, second site you get the amount of water and also the nutrients, and the third site you get the amount of water and the nutrients, and they are actually different. Okay, that because it depends on where area has been a lot of degradation or lot of trees has been deforested or cleared, and this area has a little area that has been deforested, and this area has also has been not deforested. Okay, then you get their samples and then you compare your result, okay, of that experiment. If where areas where is the site that has less water has been retained and a large amount of nutrients has been lost. Okay, so that is the independent and independent variable. And the last one is what we call the controlled variable, and it is the constant variable in all the process of experiment. Okay, so like for example, if they tested the hypothesis for the soil nutrient nitrogen and then repeated their controlled experiment for phosphorus, for example, that like for example, if you have a controlled soil nutrient, okay, in the kind of area, okay, like for example, you put a fixed amount of nitrogen or a fixed amount of phosphorus, okay, that would be your control. That means the same amount has been incorporated there, okay. So it's a constant variable in all the process of experiment.